All set. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Clerk and Madam Clerk. Thank you once again for this evening's event and running it. And great job of you doing in the clerk's office, so thank you. Madam Clerk, today is Tuesday, February 16th, 2021. This is the City of Providence City Council Committee on Finance. I'm calling this meeting to order. Could you please do a roll call, please?
Chairman Igliosi.
Present.
Vice Chairwoman Ryan.
Present.
Councilman Castillo.
Present.
Councilman Anthony.
Present.
Councilman Taylor.
Here.
We have 5 present. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Let the record reflect that Deputy Majority Leader Mary Kay Harris is present. Councilman Pedro Espinal is present. The Internal Auditor Gina Costa is present. Our Advisor Ernie Almonte is present. Billy Kaplan, Deputy Chief of Staff, is present. P.J. Fox, the Chief of Staff, is present. And we also have Sean Bouchard. And then, of course, we have Kevin McHugh, who is going to be our city solicitor for this evening's meeting. Is that correct, Mr. McHugh?
Yes, Councilman.
Thank you very much. All right. So first, let's take some items. We'll take a motion to waive the readings of item 1, 2, and 3 and to continue to the next meeting.
So moved.
By Councilor Castillo. Discussion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. I need a motion to continue per the request of the sponsor.
Mr. Chairman.
Motion. Hang on. I'm sorry. Wait, so Councilman Anthony.
Yes, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I was on mute when I.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's all right. It's my fault.
Councilman Anthony?
I am just wondering when we will be discussing the budget.
We're working. We are working on that. They are putting together those documents. Hopefully, we'll be seeing them in the future.
And is that the city staff you're referring to?
Working with the city and the city's executive and the legislative staff.
Okay, because we are, in the middle of February and the state has passed their budget. I'm just wondering why we aren't passing ours.
Well, I think that's a misnomer. No one's not passing ours. I mean, right now we're pay-as-you-go, as you know. The city charter allows this to happen. The city is not in any type of financial jeopardy at this time. The 2021 budget, as you know, had $3 million worth of new jobs and pay provisions, which you can't carry them over because there's no money to pay for those. And there's also some adjustments here and there that have to be attributed to different aspects of what was been spent presently in the city budget. So they're working it out. There's really there's no jeopardy. There's no financial jeopardy. The whole world is in COVID lockdown. The whole world knows its exceptions, and so we're okay. They're working out they're fine-tuning, making those amendments and adjustments. And they'll present it to the Finance Committee, and then we can go from there. And then really, the hard work's going to be in the budget for the 2022 budget, because that's where all the massive increases in jobs and pay raises and all the other stuff people are looking for. New programming, new companies, new departments, all the massive 18-wheeler truckload of asks and all different requests. $1 million here, $2 million here, new jobs here. So the 2022 budget will have all those wonderful items that everybody's looking to put into the budget, and we can deal with them there, and we can get in a deep dive on those aspects. As you know, the state passed the budget, provisional budget, so we'll be doing the same,
So we will. Okay, I just wanted to. So we will be passing fiscal year 21 budget. That's what I would.
Yes, we will, and there'll be and it's not going to be any monumental, dramatic change from 2020. The dramatic changes, I presume, if the council wants, will be all the truckloads of asks that everybody's looking to put into this budget, all the jobs and pay raises, like I said, all the new departments and all the other stuff that everybody wants to do, the millions and millions of dollars that all of you can decide where you want to get it from and if you want to raise taxes. So that'll be your decision as we roll along for 2022. With that, I'm going to move on to the next item, item number 4. Per the request of the sponsor, he requested the item number 4 to be continued. Do I have a
So
motion to
moved.
that effect? Vice Chair makes a
Second.
motion, second by Councilwoman Castillo. Discussion, all in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Next item, Madam Clerk, item number 5, please.
Resolution authorizing approval of the following contract awards by the Board of Contract and Supply in accordance with Section 21-26B of the Code of Ordinances, Environmental Cleaning and Association, $100,000, Department of Planning and Development.
Okay. Do we have anybody here who can explain item number 5? Is anybody here to talk about this item?
Donnie or Emily?
I do not know.
Hi, Ms. Friedman. Would you like me to swear her in, sir?
Yes, please.
Would you please raise your right hand? Swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Thank you.
Could you please state your name and title for the record?
Emily Friedman, Director of Community Development for the Department of Planning and Development.
Thank you.
Okay, so can you tell us what this is all about? Environmental Training Institute Association, is this it's $100,000 just to give a grant to somebody? What is it about, Ms. Friedman?
Happy to explain. Thank you for having me. Items 5 through 9 on the agenda are all proposed sub-grantees under the city's Lead Safe Providence program. To provide background to the committee, the Lead Safe Providence program is funded through a competitive grant that the city applies for and receives through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The grant is the Lead Hazard Demonstration Program. We've been very pleased to receive this competitive grant, highly competitive grant, 9 times now. We have been awarded $5.7 million, which is the maximum amount available under the program, to continue this program for the next 42 months. The proposed subgrantees are each agencies that are singularly qualified to provide specialized services under the program. Item number 5, the Environmental Training Institute provides workforce training that is Department of Health licensed, which is a requirement under the grant. There is a workforce training component and benchmarks that must be met. ETI is the singularly licensed provider for this type of training.
So I guess you mentioned that also items 6 and 7 are part of the same program. Is that correct, Ms. Friedman?
6, 7, 8, and 9 as well.
Okay. So so can you tell us how is the lead paint remediation programs going? Where are we? Where do we stand in the city? Where were we? Where are we today? And where do we see ourselves? So what's happening out there?
Happy to expound on that. The city has, again, as I mentioned, received 9 competitive grants. This is one of really the only financial programs available to assist low-income families with dealing with the health effects of lead-based paint in their homes. Unfortunately, the city of Providence is one of the hardest hit communities because of our aging housing stock. Almost, I believe 90% of our housing stock was built before 1978, which was when lead paint was outlawed. And so through this grant, we're able to assist hundreds of units over the performance period. But unfortunately, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of lead hazard mitigation. It's very expensive to repair, requires window replacements of trim, siding, and for our larger multifamily homes, this is a very expensive endeavor. So we're thrilled to be able to continue the program for the next 42 months.
So, but have you guys been following a chart, like how, and this has been going on for a long time, what's been our impact, what's been the positive impact? Like where are we? I get 90%, but does that mean now we've got it down to 85%? What's happening out there? Do you have any tangible or some anecdotal evidence, demonstrative evidence to tell us about what's going on? Can you give us a little look-see and what's happening, and is it having an impact? What's going on out there?
Yes, we're very pleased to say it has had an impact. Over the history of the program, we have assisted over 1,500 housing units and made all of those lead safe. And so all of those properties that are assisted through the program now have lead safe certificates and are required to maintain those certificates in perpetuity. And so we can feel confident that those 1,500 houses that we've assisted and the additional 200 plus that will assist through this new grant have been made lead safe and will remain lead safe. We
So these grants here will allow you to address over another 200 housing units, is that what you're saying? Are they single-family housing or multifamily, or is it a mixture?
It's a mixture, but I would say the preponderance is our large 2 and 3 family multifamily homes.
And it sounds like the owners or homeowners or landlords, they can qualify for these types of grants to have get the remediation done. Is that correct?
That's correct. So we accept applications on a rolling basis from both investor owners and owner occupants. If any members of the council or the council office have constituents that are interested in the program, we have materials that we're happy to share with you to encourage enrollment. We would love to be assisting as many houses as possible. It is a forgivable loan program.
Do you have, how many do you have right now enrolled? Like, do you have a backlog? Do you have we got 50 people, got 50 houses already enrolled? And or do we have 200, or do you have a backlog? What's going on with the enrollment?
So enrollment remains strong. We have approximately 100 units that are in the pipeline. However, those have not all yet been income certified. So it's expected that we'll have some drop out, some come in. So certainly we are always accepting referrals at any time.
Okay. And so, and is there an income point where a person can qualify and not qualify for these loans? What's that income point?
So it is a HUD funded program. And so we are bound by the HUD income limits, which for the program overall, it's 80% of area median income, which is defined by HUD.
Okay. So then, could landlords who own like a 3-decker, would they end up qualifying? They could qualify for this, you think?
So the qualification is based on occupancy. And so investor-owned properties can qualify if their tenants are income qualified.
Okay, so you use the tenant's income to qualify for the loan. So this way, if some landlord owns like 2 or 3 of these types of houses and they don't have the wherewithal, they can actually utilize the tenant as the entree into acquiring the loans to get the remediation done. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. So our goal is to have this be an attractive program to investor owners as well, so that they are encouraged to address the lead hazards in their property and rent safely to low-income tenants with children.
And I think you said it was 80% of HUD. What exactly is the income? Is it more than, is it $40,000 or less? What's the number? Can you give us a guide?
So it depends on the household size and composition. So for 80% of area median income for a household of 4, for example, that's an income of $69,600. If you are a household of 1, that's $48,750 as the upper limit. So
is it that if a landlord had 1 individual at that, they could only remediate that 1 unit, or would it be the whole? So if you had 2 incomes that were like over the limit and 1 below, you could get 1 unit remediated, but the other 2 you could not. You'd have to do it on your own.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right. So it seems like we should probably, Madam Auditor, I know you any issues on any of these items, and just what I'll do for the record, give a motion to take items 6, 7, 8, and 9 at the same time.
So moved.
Vice Chair, second. Discussion, all in favor? We'll take them all up. Vice Chair, you have a question, please?
Yes, I do. First of all, Emily, I would just like to say this is a fantastic program, and the results are wonderful. Great improvement to our housing stock, and I know how hard you work on this program. My only question is relative to the training component of the program. Do we use about $100,000 of training each year? Is that grown? Has that, subsided? And what is the training component? Could you just explain that?
Absolutely, happy to. The training component is a requirement under the grant guidelines itself. I apologize.
That's okay.
Sounds like someone's mic went out of some sort. Ms. Friedman,
Yeah.
can you hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, there you go.
So one of the parameters of the grant is that we do have a workforce component to ensure that there's a steady pipeline of lead certified workers and inspectors available to assist in the remediation of these units. It's very important to note that lead hazard mitigation work must be done by properly certified workers. The certification process is governed by Department of Health as well as the US EPA. So we have 2 training providers who are certified to work in the jurisdiction of Providence. That is ETI as well as Childhood Lead Action Project. And so over the 42 months, this is the anticipated amount for training. And our goal is to certify over 120 workers. And so a great benefit of this program that's perhaps not well known is that it is a pretty robust workforce development program as well.
So, so each year, about the same amount of money is allocated from this grant for training. Is there any priority given or additional points awarded for women and minority business enterprises?
So we do try to encourage and promote that, and one mechanism of doing that is offering the trainings in both English and Spanish, so it is accessible to those who don't speak English as a first language. And so we are very proud in the track record of diversity in these programs, and we're really excited that it's a workforce opportunity for the people of Providence as well.
So what is the component of women and minority business enterprises that have been trained through this grant and through this training bucket, if you will, of funds over the years? Has it grown? Has it stayed the same? How are we doing, I guess?
Sure. So it has grown steadily over the years. Again, the biggest, I think, component of that has been pivoting, operating these trainings in Spanish. And so I don't have a detailed breakdown, but certainly could do an analysis of the diversity of training participants over the years.
I'd like to see that, Emily. I think that's important in these programs. There's a lot of funds, grant funding, and you've been doing a great job. And hats off to you in running these programs. And I'm very aware of the restrictions, HUD guidelines. It can be complicated. It can be confusing, and you seem to be able to manage your way through each year seamlessly. So this in no way is intended to be questioning you. I just recognize it's a tremendous opportunity. And I bumped into a lead abatement certified person recently. It was a woman. And I was very impressed. She told me about her training, and she told me what a difference it had made in her life personally. So I'm intimately familiar with how these training programs can help. It's certainly an economic engine for us. And I think it's an important tool not to lose sight of for the city to be diligent in making sure that we're achieving our women and minority business enterprise goals. Thank you. I'd love to see those numbers. If you can share that with our clerk, and if that could be circulated, I'd greatly appreciate it. And thank you for your responses, Emily. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome. Internal Auditor.
Hi, Emily. My question is, how were these vendors selected? And is it in compliance with the grant guidelines that you selected one vendor and it was not competitive bid?
Yes. So these, again, are providers who are singularly qualified to provide the service, highly specialized service. Example, in the case of the training providers, they are the singular certified training providers operating in the state of Rhode Island. In terms of Community Action Partnership with Providence, we are required to conduct co-enrollments with Department of Energy funded weatherization programs. Community Action Partnership of Providence is the only DOE funded weatherization provider authorized to operate in the jurisdiction of Providence. Finally, Prospect Charter Care is, we are required to have a healthcare component. And so Prospect Charter Care, formerly known as St. Joseph's, is the only lead medical clinic in Providence that specifically specializes in health services for lead poisoned children. And so all of these, if we were to competitively bid them, they're really our sole source providers.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Anthony?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Emily, for this report. And I know we talked about the training aspect, which I'd be very interested to see the figures on that. But in terms of who the remediators, how are the people who actually do the work? So actually are hired to do the work. How are they hired?
Sure, that's an excellent question. Thank you. And I'm glad I can expound on that. So we are required in terms of procurement under this program to bid out every scope of work and every remediation that occurs at the property individually. And so we will also seek authorization through the Board of Contract and Supply to develop an on-call list of qualified lead hazard reduction firms. And so a communication will also go out to the board on that. From that list, we are required to solicit no less than 3 bids. So every job is essentially competitively procured from the state's list of certified contractors. That list is, I believe, 17 contractors at this point in time. And again, our workforce component's goal is to try to boost who is certified in the state of Rhode Island to do that work.
And then as a follow-up, how do you get on that list? Because I hear there's some problems with that.
So the training is rigorous and onerous, and that is why we are trying, as a city and through this grant, to bolster that workforce and ensure that there's adequate workers as well as supervisors who are appropriately licensed through Department of Health and EPA. It is a bit difficult to get on the state's list. There are insurance requirements and the licensure requirements as well. But our goal, one of our policy goals through this grant, is to expand that list so that we have as broad a pool of contractors, especially MBEs and WBEs, to bid from for each job. But yes, we are required to bid each individual mitigation job as properties are in the program.
And is it possible to get a list of those 17 providers?
Yes.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All set? Okay. So no more questions. Can we take a motion to recommend, I guess, approval and vote it back to the Board of Contract and Supply items 5 through 9?
Yes, so moved, Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair makes that motion. Second by
Second.
Councilman Taylor. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Councilman Anthony, can you lower your hand, please? Thank you. So we have the last item on the docket, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I believe, is Mr. Dante Bellini available?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So why don't we have Mr. Bellini get sworn in, and then why don't we, let's talk to him first, all right?
Mr. Bellini, would you please raise your right hand? Do you swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and title for the record.
Dante Bellini, City School Controller.
Welcome, Mr. Bellini. Thank you very much. As you all know, I've asked Mr. Bellini in the past, and I've also asked him this evening. As you know, there's this conversation about tax stabilization in the city of Providence, the tax stabilization program, and I've heard accolades and also disparaging remarks from former council members, present council members, and future council members. And what always gives me concern is no one's really understands exactly what really tax stabilization program really is. And a lot of you folks, most of you weren't here 20 plus years ago when the city was, nothing was going on, and there was just empty lots and just a complete wreck. And one of the economic tools that the city started utilizing through the city council, actually through the State House enabling legislation, was allowing a tax stabilization program. And over the years, it has evolved based on the economics of the city and, of course, the economics of the state. Prior, when I first came on, way back when, one of the driving forces of tax stabilizations was about, it had to produce so many jobs. It had to pretty much take a footprint, usually an empty footprint, and develop a new structure. So the city would either have a footprint that was generating zero taxes or nominal taxes, and in return, a new structure would be built. And a lot of it was about getting companies back into the city the best they could. And of course, as you've seen, the city has evolved from a vibrant financial district, which now is basically it's a bed and breakfast, hotels, and it's also really an educational center for schools, where it's mainly dorm rooms and et cetera, where the financial district has moved out, and the economics have changed of the city and the state. So the tax stabilization had to evolve, which then it started evolving into what was the economic driving forces of the time, which of course was the expansion of hotels, expansion of rental property, apartments, because there was a growing need for the hotels because of the vibrant tourist attraction the city was growing on one end, right? And then, of course, the growing of the medical facilities and the education facilities, which needed hotel space for all the visitors. And then, of course, those facilities growing, which they needed, tenant space, renter space, because of all the students or parents or the overflow from Boston and their growth. So I asked Mr. Bellini to give a comprehensive, and he's put together a report, and I believe that Mr. Clerk, are you going to forward it to the committee members?
I can publish this on our portal, and apologies that it is quite large.
So so he's going to put it on the portal, and what we'll do is we'll have Mr. Bellini kind of explain a little bit about it. We're probably going to have to come back because it's pretty comprehensive, and it talks about all the different tax stabilizations and even see the evolution of them. And more importantly, it shows, by the way, we can talk about the fiscal impact, because I keep on hearing this conversation a lot about how, for some reason, the tax stabilizations have some type of nefarious meaning to it, or some hasn't led to the desired result, which was growth in the city's tax base, more construction jobs, and also some more permanent jobs. And I think it's important that council members, present and future, have a better understanding. This is an economic tool to help with growth. And as you all know, we're in an economic down cycle. So we need to be very cautious in how we embrace economic tools and how we try to attract construction back into the city, because we have greater competition now. I'm sure you all know. I mean, Cranston, Johnston, and North Providence have changed dramatically in the past 20 years. They have become Warwick too, have been far more competitive of attracting attracting new businesses to establish in those cities and towns, and also having businesses in Providence relocate themselves in those cities and towns because they have a more economic, attractive packaging and locations for those businesses to go to. The capital city isn't just competing with Boston, we're competing with our cities right around us now, because they've changed dramatically. I mean, I use Johnson as a perfect example. Johnson, in the past 10 plus years, the economic growth has just been tremendous, and they've had some serious businesses relocate specifically there. So we're competing with our neighbors, not just our state neighbors, but with our neighbors in neighboring cities and towns within this state, to get businesses to relocate or locate in the city. So I thought it was important that we get a little more understanding of where we at, what we've done and where we are today, and then what we should be considering in the future. Because we need to do everything we can now to figure out how to make the city more attractive, not less attractive. Right? And I know we had that conversation recently, but so I'm going to let Mr. Bellini, Mr. Clerk, were you able to get on the portal first of all?
It is there.
So I'm asking the community members, can you go to the portal, please, and the council members, can you make sure you see the document, then we'll enter it? I want to give the clerk some time to get it onto the portal so I don't have to hear, I don't see it. So can we see if we can see if they can see it first? And it's a multi-page and is entitled Tax Stabilization Agreement Portfolio. It's dated January 12th, 2021.
And I can share my screen.
I know, but I want to make sure everybody has access to it first.
Show the link if you'd like. I can.
Okay, yeah. But the clerk's going to show you the link to make sure all of you can see it, okay?
So for those of the public or those that are unfamiliar, on the agenda that was published publicly for this meeting, you will find the link to the portal, which is down here. It's in the middle of the page. This is the link here that you would want to select. And if you click on this link here, it will open up a link, just as I just opened up, and it will take you to the web page that shows all of the attachments that we have been putting up since the beginning of the budget, and you'll find this new attachment at the very bottom of the list. Here it is, Providence TSA Portfolio Presentation. Okay, here is the...
1 second, committee members, do you see it? Do you have access to it, first of all?
Not yet, Mr. Chair.
How about the other council members? Do you
I
see
do.
it? Do you have it?
Thank you.
All right. And while you're still looking for it all, I did talk to Mr. Bellini, and part of his presentation, which I love, is that he's showing you a lot of pre-construction and post-construction. And he's showing you basically empty lots to buildings, old buildings to new buildings. And he also has when the tax stabilization begins and ends, and you'll be seeing there's a lot of TSAs that are going to expire the next 3 to 4 or 5 years, the next couple of years in my term, and then in your next terms, council members. So you will start seeing those businesses, that you will start seeing even greater benefit to this economic TSA development program that started years ago. You're going to start seeing things come online at full tax rate. So this is all. So that's going to only benefit the city's bottom line in creating a greater tax base. And that was the whole purpose. As you all know, I think over 40% of the city of Providence's property is tax exempt and growing. When I first came on the council, it was like it was in 30%. It's grown and it keeps on growing. And that is what you're competing to. You're competing with a growing tax exemption base. You're competing with greater economic competition from our neighboring cities and towns that are becoming more economically attractive, whether it's their taxes or their economic development packages, and also we're competing with neighboring states. So we have to start thinking a little more macro, and that's what the tax stabilization is about. It's about being a little more macro approach and how to get the city moving again, and how we can keep on making sure that businesses know we're open for business and we should try to offer attractive packages for them. And I understand economics sometimes is very dull, but at the end you will see a greater benefit when your tax base grows and makes it easier and takes the burden off having to raise taxes because your base will naturally grow. Does everybody have access to it now? Yeah.
I have access now, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Councilman Espinal, do you have a Deputy Majority Leader Harris? All of you see it? I hope. Councilman Taylor?
I see it.
I'm all right.
Perfect. Okay. So, Mr. Bellini, first of all, thank you. Thank you for attending this evening. And then could you give us a quick little background on what you put together, and then kind of take us through it a little bit? I know there's a lot here, so we're not going to go page by page. My goal is for you to give us an understanding of what's going on, what's happening, what some of the anecdotal evidence is. Then we'll take some questions from council members, and then I'll let them all digest this package, which is excellent, and then we'll probably bring you back for further questioning, if that's okay. Okay?
That's good.
Thank you, Mr. Bellini. You have the mic, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the members of the committee. I prepared the portfolio to be in compliance with some of the changes we last discussed back in the pre-COVID times. We've added a little more information at the end of the packet we had before. Would it be easier if I shared my screen with everybody still, even though you all have it? Okay.
Why don't you do that? That'd be great. This way you can pick and choose what portion of your report you want us to look at, and it's gonna be a lot easier for discussion purposes, okay?
Absolutely. Okay. So this is the tax stabilization agreement portfolio. It is comprehensive in the number of, it has all the active TSAs in it, the active tax stabilization agreements. We have the table of contents here, and it's set the type of agreement. We have our city council approved agreements, historic properties, Neighborhood Revitalization Act, and commercial and residential property under the 195 redevelopment. Just to give you kind of a synopsis in the past year, we've only added one. The most recent TSA we added to this list was back in December of 2019. That's only because that's the last active one that came online with tax that I have. That's Bat Whitwash LLC, and I believe that's on Washington Street. In the past year, we've also collected $128,000 in Parks and Recreation Fund fees, another $35,000 in administrative fees. Life to date, we've collected $313,000 in Parks and Recreation fees, and next year we're going to have another $134,000. I don't know if you want me to go into that Parks and Recreation Fund, Mr. Chairman.
Just so everybody understands, it's called the Parks. It's actually called the City Council Parks and Recreational Trust Account. It's a fund that was established, and in the past, what would happen is that as part of community commitment, way back when you see some of these tax stabilizations from the beginning to the present, did you put them in chronological order?
No, these are kind of in a.
It's okay, that's fine. So we created the City Council Parks Recreational Trust account, and no, it's not an account that the City Council has control over. So I've heard that, I don't know how many times I keep on hearing that from the detractors, but it's not the case. So I'll keep on repeating it so everybody understands this. It's an account which the money will get funded into a trust, and the City Parks Commission, in this case the superintendent, will have control over to specifically utilize for brick and mortar programs, brick and mortar projects, and not a program, meaning not to hire people for a job, but to build a new park, a new playground, rehab a recreational center. As you know, and maybe not all of you do, but the City of Providence throughout the past 100+ years, through philanthropic measures, has received money from different individuals who created these trust accounts to do certain things, like to plant trees in the city, to help with the North Burial Ground, all these kinds of things. So what we did is we took a cue from them and utilized the tax stabilization program as a way to create this trust account, which will grow, and as you can hear, grow and blossom into a trust account, which will a certain percentage every year at a certain time will be able, the superintendent of parks will be able to use to build, rehab, or playgrounds and parks throughout the entire city of Providence. So this was the city council's way of giving back to the tax stabilization. So we were not only getting a new development in downtown Providence, but then we have the now potentially getting new playgrounds throughout our neighborhoods. So that was the connection, showing a direct connection versus a one-time offer. And I'll give you an example. G-Tech was negotiated way back when, G-Tech provided what they call computer labs to all the recreational centers. But it was a one-time opportunity, and that was at the time, that's what you could negotiate for. It was the most they could get. Now, G-Tech, of course, was a far bigger corporation and company, so they clearly could have done a little more, but that's what it was. And that was a little more complicated because the state was involved, and it was a bigger conversation. It just wasn't simply the city of Providence doing one-on-one negotiations. So the City Council Parks and Recreation Trust account, and that's important people understand that, is an account that will continue to grow. And I won't see it, but some of you will, probably the next term or the term after that, will see superintendent be able to utilize a certain percentage of the trust account to rehab some parks and playgrounds. That's what that's about. So you can, and not every TSA has it. It was an initiative that goes back about maybe 6 years now. I think it's 6 or 7 years. Okay. So you can continue, Mr. Bellini.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there was also the administrative fee that we charge our TSA, which is essentially just to cover overhead.
Can everybody mute themselves on their end because it's getting feedback, okay?
And so I think the best way to illustrate what's in this is to just pick one property at random. So I'm going to go to, they actually are in chronological order from when you all get a chance to take a look yourselves. Okay, we will go to 55 Cromwell Street. There we go. And I'll just start. Each portfolio is 2 pages.
Mr. Bellini, what page is that?
I apologize. That's it's numbered page 35 and 36. In the PM, actually page 40.
Thank you. All right.
You're welcome.
All right, you have it.
Each page has its own section that you'll find on every page, starting with the basics, the type of TSA, which I mentioned earlier. You have your city council versus your I-195 redevelopment. Property address, the parcel number, and then we go into the unabated taxes, the stabilized payment, which is another word for what they paid in the tax year presented. And then you have the abated amount, which is the tax savings that the owner is realizing on the TSA. Then we have a description of the project along with the photographs that the chairman mentioned. And in the cases of those with Parks and Recreation Fund fees, there's an explanation of how that fee is calculated. And just you have your monitoring fee along with the same thing. If there was one here, you would see how that was calculated. And then on the next,
Mr. Bellini,
yes.
Did you were you able to put in, for example, how many jobs? Because some of them brought jobs. You know, how many permanent jobs and temp? Did you add that to that? And if you haven't, could you? If you haven't, could you do that for the future application? Could you amend that in the future?
So what kind of jobs are you talking about? For building it, for?
Well, I'll give you an example. When you look at the G-Tech, part of the deal was that G-Tech was going to bring in X amount of jobs. They had so many X amount of construction jobs and X amount of permanent jobs, right? So I think that's important. And I think it will show the evolution. And the latest tax stabilizations, they have construction jobs, they don't have as many permanent jobs because they're hotels or they're rental property, right? So I think it'd be very beneficial for council members to see those, and also the public to see that aspect. And also the amount of if you can also add what was the building fee, the building, what's it called? The building construction fee?
Application fee?
The application fee, that they have to get their building, what's it called? The building application fee, what do they call it? You know what I'm talking about? And like they pay like $200,000 permits, their permits and stuff.
Permit fee, Chair.
Yeah, but that's pertinent information for the members to say, oh, we got $200,000 for this project, we got $100,000. That's also part of the stuff that you end up getting with these projects.
Mhm.
So if you could add that in the future, so continue.
So I have the, let's see. So the compliance measures you'll see on the second page is basically a list of all things that are either noted as required and whether they are they have been met as of the date of the report. Not all TSAs have the same requirements because they are self-governing documents. So you'll see on 55 Cromwell Street, the taxes are current. That is a requirement for all properties. They must stay current on their taxes. The compliance fee and Parks and Recreation fee are not required on this contract. First source, that would tie into what you were describing, Mr. Chairman. This property has an executed first source agreement requirement met. However, I don't have the number of jobs as part of my database yet. I'll have to get back to you on getting that information together. The same goes for the MBE, WBE, and that's minority business enterprises and women business enterprises. That's still a work in progress, getting that information all in one warehouse. It's especially difficult because as opposed to the city paying its vendors, which are easily, you can easily tell whether they're MBE or WBE, we're dealing with a taxpayer who has to submit a list of vendors that they've used, and we don't quite have that process worked out like we do everything else just yet. So that the annual report are both under review right now for future presentation. Annual report would be more of a financial statement. Then we have the Parks and Recreation, the fees due in the current fiscal year. Parks and Recreation and annual compliance fees. In this case, again, we have a property with no requirement for these fees. So if you'd like, I can show you what one looks like that does have them required.
That's fine, I'm fine.
Mm-hmm. And then the last part of this is the fiscal impact to the city. And I think this speaks to what the chairman was describing earlier, which is how this ultimately does benefit the city over time by creating these incentives, because this property in particular was assessed at $423,600, and that was prior to any improvements. As of this year, it's in the 3.5 million range, and therefore we're getting we're already getting much higher. Well, we're getting the same tax payments at this point, but by the end of the agreement, we'll be getting 130,000 versus 15,000 because of the increase in the assessment. So each of these properties contains a presentation similar to this. I'll be happy to take questions on individual properties at the end. I just want to take one moment to show you the back that includes some of the summaries I was describing. Okay, so this would be on page 137 of the PDF and on the numbered pages. And what we have here is a summary of the fiscal impact of all the TSA agreements, all the active TSA agreements for fiscal year 21 through 40. So you have a 20-year projection. And essentially, and we have the graph of the same numbers on the page next to that. And you can just kind of see, I think visually it's the most striking on how much the city is benefiting by these improvements. You have the orange line here, which shows where the taxes would have stayed. Now this is without inflation. So this is just a flat number. Obviously that may have been slightly different in reality over time, but you can see without a doubt we're clearly benefiting from it over time. And this is only 20 years. So once you go past that, I'm sorry, what?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry, continue.
once you go past that 20-year mark, we'll have pretty much all of these properties off of their TSAs, and they'll be paying their full tax rate after that.
So in the year 2021, we're already seeing benefits, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And we're gonna see a consistent benefit. So what you're showing is the orange line, for the sake of conversation, shows the undeveloped property as is. If we didn't negotiate an economic tool for growth, and the blue line shows the impact, which is happening this year alone, and it's gonna keep on growing. So
Correct.
that's quite, you know, that's a great story. And I'm going to tell, and why I want to tell this story is because my council colleagues who've been on the council meeting before, my council colleagues who used to be on the council, and my council colleagues who've been on longer than some of the new ones, we should all be proud of this. We should all be proud of the positive impact these negotiated tax stabilizations are having on the city of Providence's tax base. It's important that we don't succumb to the political rhetoric and the negative narrative that seems to be prevalent about attacking these and not having the full story told. And this is the story. And I urge my council colleagues, read it, digest it. You should embrace it. This is going to benefit my new colleagues and my future colleagues. So this is a positive thing, and the city of Providence should be proud of this because we work this out with different mayors and different councils, and it's quite an impressive graph. Vice Chair Ryan? Thank
you, Mr. Chair. I echo your sentiments, and I want to thank Mr. Bellini for working on this presentation. It's very thorough and it's very helpful on so many levels. Just a comment that I would like to ask, if it's possible, if you could add a summary slide for each of the TSAs, the type of TSA they are, and then just, you know, columns summarizing the key components of those TSAs. You know, we talked about the dollars to the Parks and Rec, the jobs created, whether the TSA is in compliance, what the permitting fees are, and bottom line, you know, what is the benefit to the city of Providence. Just in one place that you could look and just have a reference for every single TSA that you list in your introduction. And then the other thing, I love this slide that you've got presented right now, but I would be intrigued to see the prior years. I know personally, as a member of the Finance Committee, we've labored over a number of TSAs just in the past 6 years. But I'm wondering if you could go back in time. If you don't have the data, I certainly understand that because you weren't in the position that you are in now. But I think there's merit in it. It would be very helpful if you could present graphically. I mean, you don't need, you know, all of the data, but if you could go back further and just present to us the value of those TSAs that existed years ago and how we've grown. So I get what you're presenting now are active TSAs. I just would be interested in, if, you know, possible, you know, delving a little deeper prior to this. But again, great job. Thank you very much. And I do agree that adding jobs for construction, during construction, and then permanent is helpful. Oh, there's one other thing that that struck me. You had talked about adding to your database numbers of jobs created through the first source as a result of the first source agreements. And I remember when First Source came before us, we talked about a need for annual reporting from them. And I'm wondering if you've developed an internal control, if you will, for receiving annual reporting for them so that you're constantly updating, at least during the life of the TSA, particularly on the neighborhood sides, uh, neighborhood side TSAs. So I do think it would be helpful if we could get from them an annual update, because I know when you're trying to get the TSA approved, it's, everybody's laser focused on, what are the deliverables to the city of Providence? How do we benefit long-term from that relationship? In compliance, which is the reason we have you. Sometimes we lose sight of that in future years. So just comment if you could. I know you said you were going to try to add to your database. I'd be interested in trying to put some controls around annual updates to that data, or some process in place that you could capture that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm good.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councilwoman Anthony, in the internal order. Councilwoman Anthony.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd also like to thank you. This is a wonderful presentation, a very detailed description of, the economic development that's been created by this, by our TSAs, and I think this is quite valuable. My concern is still the ongoing the ongoing compliance with our first source and our MBE, WBE requirements. And so I don't know, is it you that's going to be reporting back or responsible to report on that, or each, is that, I don't understand who's doing the enforcement and how. Again, is it, as the majority leader said, is it going to be through annual reports that we figure that out? I think that's really where, where I'd like to see a little more in-depth report. And then I'd also like to know what happens when the developer is not in compliance with the TSA agreement. Is there an example of what's happened there? I mean, I'd like to know what TSAs are no longer compliant and what's happened with those.
Councilwoman Anthony and Councilwoman Ryan. I'll address what you spoke to in order. Councilwoman Ryan.
Yes, sir.
About the old TSA, the benefits to the city on our expired contracts. That should not be an issue to obtain from the assessor's office. I will work with them on that to get that ready for the next time we meet.
Fabulous.
Yes, and both spoke to the first source agreements, and Councilwoman Anthony spoke to the MWBE. So my collection of data here stems from mostly financial data, along with the items that are outlined in the tax stabilization agreements as hard requirements. First source agreement is considered a hard requirement, and it's something that I worked very closely with the first source director on with the city. However, she is currently out indefinitely. I know who will be filling her role for the time being, so I will have to get reacquainted with our new person. But that may take some time. I don't know how much information is readily available today, but I will report back anything I can pull together for our next presentation. As far as MWBE is concerned, that is something that we also have a person in charge of that, State Rep Grace Diaz. And she has been working with the administration, and I have been involved in those meetings. And our biggest acts to move that forward in recent weeks has been to make the MWBE requirement a mandate in the TSAs. It's not something that you can do retroactively necessarily, but going forward it will be. I should have prefaced that with the MWBE requirement is a soft requirement within the TSAs, meaning a good faith effort is required by the TSA recipient. However, it is my understanding that they would not be revoked if they did not provide the reporting needed for it. So what we're doing is trying to make that more of a, have more teeth, essentially. As far as what not meeting these requirements, what the consequences are of that, I cannot answer that. I can probably put you in touch, or I can reach out to the solicitor's office about that. We have
Bellini.
had a back and forth about that.
Mr. Bellini, I think
Yes.
the law department can give us some info on that, because if anybody was going to enforce the contract either way, it would be the law department. So I think we can ask them to, at the next meeting, tell us where they are and how they handle the enforcement, because it would be a legal action of the enforcement of the contract.
Thank you,
So-
Mr. Chairman. I did not want to try to answer that.
And if I may say, Mr. Bellini's only been with this program for not even a year, has it been? Has it been a year? How long has it been?
A year and a half.
Yeah, so, I'm going to give him a little life preserver because he deserves it. The WBE and MBE process and the first source has always been in the shop of Bonnie Nickerson and the planning department. It's always been there, and it's always been they've always had a struggle since day one of running those types of oversight reviews. So it's always been in that shop since the beginning of this journey, I can tell you that. And they've always had starts and fits and ups and downs. As for the WB and MBE, you are correct, it's called a good faith effort, because that's based on the Fed statute, Fed standard. Because when you do a WB and MBE, when you're doing construction projects, whether it's horizontal or vertical, what happens is, first of all, the state qualifies what's called women business-owned enterprises and disadvantaged business-owned enterprises. And the state has a qualified list of contractors who are qualified as WBE and MBEs, and who can do vertical and horizontal construction. And what happens in some of these construction projects is that there's not always you need to get cement, and there won't be a WBE or MBE cement company. So what happens is they have to find alternative aspects of the project to see if they can get a DBE or WBE outfit to do that. For example, fencing, stuff like that. Because there's limited actual companies that are WBE and MBE and DBEs in the state, because there's just not enough work statewide. There's only so many, and so the state has a laundry list. So I would suggest my council colleagues, if you go to the Department of Administration, they actually have the website on it, and it shows all because they qualify all those, those companies. And then the contractor or the proposed developer can utilize that list to hire those contractors to do work, for example, fencing, or let's say they do electrical work and stuff like that. And then sometimes what they do is they set a goal and they try to meet that goal. And then sometimes a contractor falls out, or they can't find enough contractors for that particular build. So that's why I just wanted to mention, I know you mentioned good faith effort, and I do know for a fact it's a federal standard, because I'm well versed in the operations of that programming statewide. So just a little edification on that. So I think, and I guess what we can do is maybe we can invite the director or the administrator of that program from the Department of Planning, and they can give us a rundown of how that's going and what they're doing. Right? So we can do that. All right, I think that would be helpful.
Better than I could.
Okay. On internal order, do you have any questions or comments?
Just a couple of comments. First of all, Dante, incredible job. Having attempted this in the past, this is incredible. The amount of time that must have gone into this. I absolutely appreciate this. And I know you're looking purely from financials. I think we did the same, but great job. And Secondly, I just wanted to point out to the council and everyone else, when we get a new budget and our tax levy increases due to natural growth, a bulk of this is due to this. It's a natural growth. We didn't raise taxes. Pretty much residential rates don't change and their values don't change. But this provides for that natural growth for the city and the tax base. So that is really, really good. And third, in regards to the first source, I spoke to the director and I reached out to her about a requirement to report to the city council quarterly. Last I knew, she was reporting quarterly because I have checked. She does include all of the Providence hires for all CDBG, TSAs, and any other grants that the city provides to anyone. She does have them. I did not know she was out, so I don't know when the last time one was reported, but there is a lot of information there as well. And lastly, there are a number of TSAs that have not been submitted to the council. They don't have to get council approval, they're administrative. But I think as the clerk can attest, he will get annual reports, but he has nowhere to attach them to. I'm not looking for approval from the council, but just as a communication to the council that these TSAs have also been passed. So the clerk, who is the clerk of the city, can file these annual reports somewhere. Otherwise, they're in limbo. Those are my comments about the TSA, but Dante, incredible job. Thank you.
Thank you, Internal Auditor. I just want to dovetail, and just another thing I think is very interesting, and I've heard council colleagues on the floor talk about extolling the virtues of administrative TSAs at the expense of the city council TSAs. And what I find it so odd is they'd be the same council members extolling transparency and full disclosure. Well, administrative TSAs don't have full disclosure or transparency. They don't even have a public hearing. No one knows who's getting them, what the deal is, or anything. That's why the council's process, by the way, which was empowered to us by state statute, legislature to legislature, forcing us to make sure it's a public process, and it has been. So I'm going to keep on extolling the virtues of how well the council has done. Is it perfect? No, but the council and the past councils have done a great job of doing full disclosure and transparency to the public and giving them opportunities to speak. And by the way, administrative TSAs, no one votes on them. There is no voting. But the council TSAs, there's a vote. So when everybody says somehow that there's not enough transparency and they extol the virtues of the administrative one, I don't understand what facts they're gleaming from, because it makes no sense. And as I believe those administrative TSAs, they were under the previous administration. Is that correct? Internal Auditor? I believe those were they under the previous administration? Are those the ones we're talking about?
No, not those. It's the current ones that are actually the bigger problem. When I say bigger problem, don't necessarily have been reviewed. They've been approved and the document has been signed without someone from council from reviewing.
So that's something that we should be concerned about, especially every time when I hear an administration every year talk about how they want to acquire more power and control over this actually, by the way, this constitutional right of the council. And once again, I reiterate, the council has the exclusive right to levy, to abate, to negotiate taxes. Executive branches have never been empowered to do that. Whenever the council forgoes or gives up its constitutional power to an executive branch, you are therefore showing that you are no longer a valid branch. You're giving up one of the primary constitutional powers that you have. So I'm reiterating this, my present and future council colleagues, so they learn from the past. These fights, these conversations that folks have been having with the administrations are nothing new. Every administration wants the council null and void. It's an age-old battle of executive versus legislative branch. Internal law, I'm assuming Jimmy Lombardi, Treasurer.
Mr. Chairman, so if you recall, the council passed the administrative TSA ordinances, and one of the requirements was that the treasurer would sign off on, I'm going to say form, to make sure that they comply with the initial TSA requirements. I probably signed off on 3 of them, 3 or 4, very early on. And then we found out they forgot to send them to the treasurer's office. So there's a series of them that I'm not aware of, that they admit that they signed, still haven't sent them to me, but they admit that they signed and I guess are following them. But again, I didn't sign off on them. But I think that was a good thing where at least we would know that someone from the legislative side would take a look at it and give I'm going to say a recommendation or a sign off on saying, yes, the minimum qualifications were followed and we can move forward with this. As I mentioned, there's a number of them out there that I did not sign off on, not intentionally, they never sent them to me.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, that was the checks and balances that was put into that law. So, Councilman Anthony, your question earlier, which was, what's the ramifications if someone's not following? Here's a perfect example of an administration who is not following the city law. So now I'm going to talk to the city solicitor. City solicitor, I know you're there.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So here's my question. If a city law says in order for the city to enter into a rightful contract, right, and that contract would have to be signed off by the city treasurer, and the city treasurer did not sign off on that contract, would that contract be valid and binding?
No.
Thank you. So at this moment in time, those administrative TSAs are not valid and binding in contract law. So, Mr. City Solicitor, I would ask you to track down all these TSAs that the administration or administrations have chosen to unilaterally enter into, which, by the way, as you know, per law, you have to have the sign off by the treasurer, which means to make it legally binding. And then at that moment in time, give us an update on them, where they are, and then what's the law department doing about that? Because at this moment in time, there is no valid contract. And someone is receiving a benefit in violation of a city law, as well as a state law too, because only the city council has been empowered with tax stabilization abilities, and we're the only ones that can give it, take it, and give it with conditions. So I would ask you to investigate that ASAP and have the law department report to us at the next finance meeting to tell us where they are, what's going on with the status. And then Councilman Anthony can see, it's great. I think it's a great question she asked. What's the ramifications? It's a perfect example. And I also would ask one other thing. I know you mentioned about first source, Mr. Bellini. First source is only one aspect of the tax stabilizations. First source is about the idea that when you're doing hiring, the goal is to hire Providence residents first, Rhode Island residents second, and et cetera. But in the original tax stabilizations, I'm going to give you GTEC for example. GTEC, part of the negotiation said they were committed to bringing X amount of jobs, permanent and construction jobs. Okay, so first source is a different animal. The first source has to do with, so there's 2 components of the job component, which was, if I remember correctly, GTEC was guaranteeing part of the agreement was 300 permanent jobs in downtown Providence, and it was so many thousand of construction jobs. First source talks about how to get Providence residents to those jobs, but there was a commitment in those saying X and Y. I'd like to have that. Then you can put the first source component, which is out of X and Y, how many were Z first source? See how, you understand what I'm talking about? Because so it's a three-part equation. It's permanent, actually it's permanent and construction/temporary, and then first source. So I'm looking for that analysis addition to this, okay? For each one of them.
I understand.
And, all right, I just want to make sure, and just to understand, the first source, actually, it was the council's initiative, none of you were here, in which the council was the one that took the administration at the time to court to force and enforce the first source ordinance. So I have to give credit to my previous council colleagues who we all joined together to filing that lawsuit against the administration at that time. So that was a perfect example that although the council was divided and there was different points of view, no different than today or yesterday, the future, the council unilaterally, the council joined forces on one issue together, and they sued and went after the administration. Although some council colleagues were extremely, friendly with that administration, they saw the fact that first source needed to be enforced. So I'm going to give my council colleagues in the past, when we all joined forces to do that, and we prevailed and won. So that's an example where the legislative branch of government coalesces on an issue together to enforce something that's important, regardless who's sitting in the second floor. So I give those examples so council colleagues can hopefully, see that things do happen like that, and it was for the betterment of the city. So I look forward to hearing what the first source report says. Any other comments or questions at this time? We're going to have Mr. Bellini come back.
No, Mr. Chair.
I want to thank Mr. Bellini, by the way. Great job. By the way, I'm glad you're there. I know it's a lot of work. You've been doing a lot of work, and it's great to see this. And I'm also going to add that this is a good story. At the end of the day, this is a good, positive story of positive economic development of the city of Providence, and we should all be extolling the virtues of this. And this is and we should be talking about, we should be crowing about it so we can attract more businesses to come back to Providence and develop in all our neighborhoods in our downtown area. So this is a great story. So thank you, by the way. It's not perfect, but it's a great story. Thank you, Mr. Bellini. With that, can I have a
Mr.
motion to
Chairman.
continue the next meeting, continue, and then we'll have Mr. Bellini do an update? And
So
we'll call the
moved.
other- Vice Chair makes that motion. Second, by Councilman Castillo. Discussion. Thank you all. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion to adjourn
So moved.
by Vice Chair, second, Councilman Castillo. Antonio, do you have a question?
No, I was waving good night.
Okay. All right.
Good night.
Thanks, all. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, all. Be well, be safe.
Good job, guys.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
night. Thank you
Thank you.
all. Great job.